The morning I saw the wedding photos on social media, something inside me quietly broke. No phone call, no invitation, just smiles without me in them. I had paid for her college, her car, even the roof above her head once. And yet, on the most important day of her life, I was just another forgotten man. But fate wasn't done with us, not yet. I never imagined silence could hurt this much. The morning I opened my phone and saw my daughter's wedding photos, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. There she was, Lily, my only child, standing in front of a flower-covered arch, laughing, radiant, beautiful. And beside her stood a man I had never met. Hundreds of smiling faces surrounded them. Family, friends, her new husband's relatives. But not me. I wasn't there. I hadn't even been invited. I sat in my small kitchen, the weak light of dawn spilling over the table, and stared at the glowing screen. The pictures kept loading, one after another, like little knives pressed into my chest. I saw the church where they married, the same one where I'd once repaired the front steps after a storm, where I'd taken Lily as a child every Sunday. They'd used my handiwork as the backdrop for a moment I wasn't worthy of attending. For a long time, I didn't move. The old clock on the wall ticked above me, each second louder than the last. The smell of my untouched coffee grew bitter. My reflection in the dark window looked older than I remembered, gray hair thinning, lines across my forehead deepening. When Margaret, my late wife, was alive, she used to tell me that Lily would always need me. Even after she was gone, I believed it. Through every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every dream too expensive to reach, I stood beside my daughter. I gave her my time, my savings, my youth. I sold my car to pay for her first semester at college. I stayed up nights grading papers just to afford her textbooks. But on the most important day of her life, she didn't even call. Maybe that was the hardest part, realizing it wasn't an accident. There was no lost invitation, no misunderstanding. It was deliberate. I was too different for her new world. A retired teacher from a small town, wearing the same worn-out jacket I'd had for 10 years, living in the same house that smelled faintly of old books and pine floor polish. I saw her new family in the pictures, her husband's parents, their gleaming smiles polished for the camera. I'd met them once, at a dinner before the engagement. The mother had been polite, but her eyes told me everything. I wasn't the kind of man she wanted her son-in-law to have as a father-in-law. Too plain, too humble. And now, Lily had chosen them over me. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of Margaret's old whiskey. The bottle had dust on it, the kind you only open for something important. I didn't drink it to forget. I drank it to remember who I'd been before the world decided I was disposable. The stars were faint, hidden by thin clouds. The sound of crickets filled the air, and somewhere down the road a car passed, its headlights briefly brushing across my yard. I closed my eyes and thought about the empty chair beside me, the one I'd built for Lily when she was 16. It was where we used to sit and talk about her dreams. Now it sat there, untouched, a quiet monument to what we once had. The next few days passed in a haze. I tried to teach my evening class, but my voice trembled. The students noticed, though none dared to ask. Afterward, I came home, made dinner for one, and stared at the empty side of the table. I told myself I would stop looking at those photos, but I didn't. Every night before bed, I opened them again, as if staring long enough could bring me answers. And then, on the 7th night, a sound broke the silence. A knock. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, like the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. Then it came again, louder this time. I looked at the clock. 10:30. Nobody ever visited me that late. My heart started to beat faster as I walked to the door. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps. I opened it and froze. There she was. Lily stood on my porch, her eyes swollen and red, her wedding makeup long gone. The white dress was replaced with a gray coat 2 sizes too big, her hands trembling. Behind her, her new husband lingered near the car, pale and silent. "Dad," she said softly, her voice breaking on the word. "Please, we need your help." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, my daughter, the one who had erased me from her happiest day, now standing before me, desperate. The porch light flickered between us, shadows moving across her face. I saw fear there, real fear. And something else too. Shame. I stepped aside slowly, saying nothing. She hesitated, as if expecting me to slam the door. But I didn't. I simply nodded toward the living room. As she stepped inside, I noticed her eyes darting around the old house. Everything was just as she'd left it. The same family photos on the wall, the same ticking clock, the same faint scent of pine wood polish. Her husband followed quietly, his gaze fixed on the floor. None of us spoke for a while. The only sound was the clock ticking in the corner. Then, finally, Lily took a shaky breath and whispered, "Something happened after the wedding." I looked at her, really looked, and I knew right then that whatever had brought her here wasn't simple. It wasn't regret. It was fear, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, but now, beneath it, something colder stirred. Not anger exactly, but a kind of quiet resolve. Fate, it seemed, had turned the wheel back toward me. And this time, I wasn't the one begging to be let in. Lily sat on the edge of the old couch, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long shadows across her face, making her look both older and smaller at the same time. Her husband stood by the door, shifting nervously, as if he was afraid the floor would open beneath him. For a while, none of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, not just with words unspoken, but with years of distance that no apology could instantly erase. Finally, I broke the silence. "Go on," I said quietly. "Tell me what happened." Her voice trembled. "It started 2 days after the wedding," she whispered. "Ethan's family, they changed." Ethan, that was the husband's name. The man in the tuxedo standing beside my daughter in all those perfect pictures. Now he looked nothing like the confident groom I'd seen online. His eyes were hollow, his face drawn. "They said I wasn't supposed to contact you anymore," Lily continued, glancing nervously at him. "That I had to focus on fitting in. They said you'd embarrass them if you ever came around." I didn't move. I just listened. My pulse was steady, though I could feel a slow, cold anger begin to grow somewhere deep inside. "They wanted to control everything," she said. "My clothes, my friends, even my job. When I told them I wanted to visit you, Ethan's father," her voice cracked. "He said if I did, he'd cut us off completely." Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "My father, he's not a kind man. He cares about appearances. After the wedding, he found out your name wasn't on the property papers for Lily's old apartment. He said it proved you couldn't provide, that she married beneath her worth." I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. "And now?" I asked. "Now you come here, after all that?" Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Because everything collapsed, Dad. Everything." She took a deep, shaky breath. 3 days ago, Ethan's father was arrested. Fraud. Money laundering. The company's gone. Everything's frozen. Their mansion, their cars, all of it. We have nowhere to go. The room fell silent again. Outside, the wind howled softly against the windows. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me. "So now," I said slowly, "you remember your father." Her shoulders shook. "I know how it looks. I know what I did. But please, I didn't know how cruel they could be. I thought marrying into their world meant safety, a better life. I was wrong." I studied her face, the same green eyes that used to light up when she'd run home from school, the same small scar above her eyebrow from when she fell off her bike. She was still my daughter, but she had chosen a life that erased me from it. Ethan stepped forward suddenly, desperate. "Mr. Rowan," he said, "we need help. Your name? It's still on the deed for that old cabin near the lake, right? The one your wife's parents left behind?" I nodded slowly. "It is. Why?" He exchanged a glance with Lily. "We were hoping maybe we could stay there, just for a while, until things settled down." The cabin. The one place I hadn't visited in years, a small wooden house on the edge of Willow Lake, surrounded by pines and memories. It was where Margaret and I had spent our honeymoon, where Lily learned to fish, where we'd once painted the walls with laughter and sunlight. Now they wanted to use it as shelter, the very people who had cast me aside like dust. I said nothing for a long moment. My mind drifted back to those nights at the lake, to Margaret's soft humming as she cooked, to Lily's laughter echoing over the water. That cabin held everything good we'd ever had, and everything we'd lost. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "You can stay," I said, "but on one condition." Lily's eyes lifted. "Anything," she said quickly. "You'll go there tomorrow morning, both of you. Alone. I'll meet you after a few days." She frowned, confused. Why not come with us? Because, I said, standing slowly, I need time to prepare. Prepare for what? Ethan asked cautiously. I gave him a small, tired smile. For what comes next? Lily reached out and touched my hand. Thank you, Dad, she whispered. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the touch either. I simply looked at her hand resting on mine, thinking of all the years I'd longed for that gesture, and how empty it felt now. They left just before midnight, their car headlights disappearing down the dirt road. I stood at the window long after they were gone, the house bathed in silence once again. Only the clock ticked on, steady as a heartbeat. I poured another glass of whiskey and sat down. The fire crackled softly, throwing orange light across the walls. Maybe it was cruel of me to let them believe I'd forgiven them so easily. But I had learned one thing over the years. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a gift. Sometimes it's the beginning of something else. Something colder. As I stared into the flames, I realized I wasn't done being a father. But this time, I wasn't here to protect. This time, I was here to teach a lesson they'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was pale gray, the kind of color that always comes before rain. The house was quiet, too quiet. For a brief second, I wondered if the whole night had just been a dream. But the two empty mugs on the table reminded me it was all real. Lily had come. She'd asked for help, and I had agreed. I spent the morning in silence, packing a small bag. Old habits never leave you. I folded my clothes neatly, checked that my flashlight worked, and took a few tools from the shed. The cabin at Willow Lake hadn't been used in years. It would need work, or at least, that's what I told myself. In truth, I already knew what I was going there for. By the time I stepped outside, a drizzle had started. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. I locked the door behind me, the old key turning with a click that echoed more than it should have. As I got into my truck, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me wasn't angry, not anymore, just determined. The drive to Willow Lake took almost 2 hours. The road wound through fields and forests, the world growing quieter with every mile. It was the same road I'd driven 1,000 times when Margaret was alive. She loved that lake. It's where the world stands still, she used to say. Maybe she was right. When I arrived, the cabin looked almost exactly as I remembered, a little weathered, but still standing strong. The wooden porch sagged slightly under my weight, the roof mossy and dark. Smoke curled from the chimney. They were already there. I parked by the old oak tree and got out. Through the window, I saw Lily moving around the living room, trying to make it livable again. A blanket draped over the couch, candles on the table. She looked small in that space, fragile, almost like the child she once was. Ethan sat near the fireplace, head in his hands. He didn't look up when I entered. "Dad," Lily said, her face lighting up for a second before guilt dulled it again. "You came." I said I would. I put my bag down, brushing raindrops from my jacket. "You managed to get the fire going." She nodded. "It's not much, but it's warm." I looked around. The same wooden beams, the same stone hearth Margaret and I built together. Time had added dust and cobwebs, but the soul of the place remained untouched. Ethan finally stood. "Thank you for letting us stay," he said quietly. "We don't know what we'll do next." I studied him for a moment. His eyes avoided mine. There was pride in him still, but it was cracked, the kind that doesn't bend, only breaks. "There's food in the pantry," I said, "and enough blankets upstairs. You'll be fine for a few days." Lily hesitated. "A few days? Where will you go?" "I'll stay nearby," I replied. "In town. There are things I need to take care of." She frowned slightly, as if she sensed there was more behind my words. But she didn't press. Instead, she followed me outside when I stepped onto the porch. The rain had stopped, and the lake shimmered beneath the cloudy sky. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "For everything." I turned to her. "Are you?" She blinked, taken aback. "Of course I am. I never wanted to hurt you, Dad. I just thought I was doing what was best. They made me believe." I raised a hand gently. "You don't have to explain, Lily. You made your choices. Now you live with them." Her lower lip trembled. "I know. But please, don't hate me." "Hate you?" I sighed. "No. But I stopped recognizing you for a while. Maybe this is how we both find our way back." I didn't add the rest, that some lessons only sink in when the world around you starts to crumble. That night, I stayed in my truck at the edge of town. The rain returned, drumming softly against the roof. I kept thinking about Margaret, about what she'd say if she saw all this. She'd probably tell me to forgive, to open my heart again. But she never had to watch our daughter treat me like a burden. The next day, I returned to the cabin with supplies, just enough to keep them comfortable. I didn't mention that I'd stopped by a friend's law office in town first. I'd asked him to check something for me. Something about the land ownership around Willow Lake. It turned out the cabin wasn't just a sentimental place. Years ago, before Margaret passed, her parents had quietly transferred the surrounding 10 acres of land into my name. And on that land, there were natural springs, small but valuable. A local development company had offered to buy it more than once. I'd always said no. Now, for the first time, I was considering saying yes. Not for the money, but for what the sale could do. Because I already knew what was coming next. Ethan's family, the same people who had laughed at me behind closed doors, were about to lose everything. Their company, their home, their reputation. And there, hidden in the ashes, was my opportunity to settle a very quiet debt. As I watched the lights from the cabin flicker through the trees that evening, I thought about the word forgiveness. It sounded so noble, so heavy. But forgiveness, I realized, was not always the opposite of revenge. Sometimes it was its disguise. And mine was only just beginning. 2 days passed before I returned to the cabin. The road was damp from last night's rain, and the smell of pine and smoke drifted through the forest. The closer I got, the slower I drove, not because of the turns, but because of what I knew was waiting for me. Through the windshield, I saw thin curls of smoke rising from the chimney. They'd settled in. The porch light was on even in daylight, a small detail that told me Lily still feared the dark. Some things never changed. When I stepped out of the truck, the sound of the gravel under my boots seemed louder than usual. Lily appeared in the doorway, brushing her hair back and forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "you came back." I said I would. Inside, the cabin felt warmer than before. A few candles flickered on the mantelpiece, and the smell of soup filled the air. Ethan sat at the table, staring into an open laptop. He closed it the moment I entered. "What's that?" I asked casually, removing my jacket. "Just trying to find work," he muttered. Lily looked at him anxiously, then back at me. "He's been searching all morning," she said. "We're just trying to figure out what comes next." I nodded, though my eyes lingered on the screen a second too long. Something about the way he closed it, sharp, defensive, told me it wasn't job listings he'd been looking at. I sat down by the fire and let the warmth reach my hands. "You two should know," I said calmly. "I've spoken to someone in town. About the property." Lily froze. "The cabin. The land," I clarified. "Turns out there's more value here than either of you thought. Developers have been eyeing this area for years. There's talk about a resort." Ethan's head snapped up. "Really?" His tone shifted instantly, interest disguised as politeness. "Yes," I said slowly. "It could be worth a fortune if handled right. But it's complicated. Legal rights, ownership transfers, all that mess. Not something an outsider could just take over." He tried to hide it, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of greed. That same hunger I'd seen once before, years ago, in another man's face. "Dad," Lily said gently, "are you thinking of selling?" "Maybe," I answered, "but not yet." That night, as they slept upstairs, I stayed awake by the dying fire. I pulled out an old envelope from my coat, the papers my lawyer friend had given me. Inside was a copy of an old document, signed almost 20 years ago. It was an investment agreement. The name on it made my blood run cold. Richard Hale, Ethan's father. Back when I was still teaching full-time, Richard had convinced me to invest a small inheritance Margaret's parents had left us into one of his projects. He promised big returns, community growth, a brighter future. Months later, the project went bankrupt. My money vanished. I never told Lily. I didn't want her to think less of the man she might one day marry into. But here it was, full circle. The man who had stolen from me had built an empire on other people's trust. And now his empire had collapsed, just like mine once did. Only this time, I wasn't the one left in ruins. The next morning, I walked down to the lake. Mist hung low over the water, the surface smooth as glass. I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft hum of nature, before Lily joined me. "You're quiet," she said. "I've had years to practice." She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. "Ethan's worried," she murmured. "He thinks his father might drag us into whatever's coming." "He might. I said, still looking at the water. People like him always do. She hesitated. You know him? I did, I said. Long before you met Ethan. Her head turned sharply. You worked with him? Not exactly, I replied. Let's just say he taught me what trust is worth. Her brow furrowed. Why didn't you ever tell me? I met her eyes finally. Would you have listened? She looked away, tears glistening at the corners. The wind carried the faint smell of rain and smoke between us. I made mistakes, Dad, she whispered. I believed people who didn't deserve it. So did I said. Once, back at the cabin, Ethan was on a call. His voice carried through the thin walls, low but urgent. When I stepped closer, I caught fragments of it. Yeah, he still owns it. No, I don't think he's planning to sell yet. I can convince him. He paused, then turned, and saw me standing in the doorway. He froze mid-sentence. Who's that? A voice crackled faintly from the phone speaker. Ethan fumbled and ended the call. Just a wrong number. I said nothing, just looked at him, long enough for the silence to become unbearable. Finally, I smiled faintly. Be careful, son. This house keeps secrets. That night, the wind howled harder. The fire flickered and dimmed. Lily slept restlessly upstairs, unaware that I sat by the window, watching the storm roll in across the lake. The past had returned, not as memory, but as justice taking shape. Richard Hale had taken from me once. Now his son was standing under my roof, relying on my mercy. And mercy, I realized, was something I no longer owed anyone. Morning came gray and heavy, the lake blanketed in mist so thick it looked like the world had been erased. I woke before dawn, as I often did. Habit, I suppose, the kind you keep even when you have no one to make breakfast for anymore. The fire from the night before had gone out, leaving only a faint smell of smoke. Upstairs, I could hear faint footsteps. Lily's, soft and uncertain. Ethan was still asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't care which. I made coffee the old way, boiling water in the dented pot, pouring it through a paper filter into a chipped mug Margaret once loved. The ritual calmed me. Lily came down quietly, rubbing her arms. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She sat across from me, and for a while we just listened to the sound of rain on the roof. I heard you talking last night, she said finally. I didn't answer. You told Ethan to be careful, she continued. Was that a warning? I took a slow sip, then looked at her. I've learned that when people lie once, they usually do it again. Just keep your eyes open. Her lips parted, but she didn't argue. For the first time, she didn't try to defend him. That was new. A few hours later, Ethan stumbled down the stairs, trying to look composed. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red. Morning, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. Lily offered him coffee, but his hand trembled slightly when he took the mug. The guilt was written all over him. That restless energy of a man whose world was built on secrets. I'll head into town, I said, standing and reaching for my jacket. Need to check on something. Ethan looked up too quickly. Need a ride? I shook my head. No, I prefer walking. Clears the mind. He nodded, pretending to be casual, but I saw the way his eyes darted to my coat pocket, where the property papers were folded neatly. As I stepped outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the trees whispered in the wind. I walked down to the small dock at the edge of the lake, the one I'd built decades ago with Margaret. The boards creaked under my weight, but they still held strong. Like me. Out there, away from everything, I made my decision. For years, I'd believed revenge meant destruction. Retaliation. Making someone hurt as you had hurt. But sitting alone on that dock, I realized something different. The most powerful revenge wasn't anger. It was control, quiet, measured, unseen. So I started building it. When I got back to town, I visited my lawyer friend again. We drew up a document, a temporary lease on the cabin and its surrounding land. It gave full permission for Mr. and Mrs. Ethan Hale to reside there indefinitely. On paper, it looked generous. But in truth, it was a trap woven in legal threads. Because once the paperwork was signed, all taxes, maintenance, and repair fees would transfer directly to them. Every broken pipe, every cracked window, every cent of upkeep, their responsibility. And if they failed to pay, the state would seize their remaining accounts. By the time I drove back that evening, the sky had cleared. The air felt sharp and clean, as if the storm had washed the world of all pretenses. Lily greeted me at the door. You were gone all day, she said softly. Is everything okay? Better than ever, I replied, handing her the folder. I brought something that'll help you both. A temporary lease for the cabin. It gives you security while you get back on your feet. Her eyes widened. Dad, you didn't have to. I insist, I interrupted gently. You've had enough uncertainty. This place should be yours for as long as you need. Ethan took the folder, scanning the pages quickly. You're serious? I nodded. Just sign where marked. He hesitated for a moment, then smiled for the first time in days. Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Truly. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she added her signature beside his. When it was done, I folded the papers neatly and tucked them into my jacket. I'll take these back to town tomorrow to make it official, I said. You two should rest. As they went upstairs, I stayed by the fire. My heart should have felt heavy, a father watching his daughter's life fall apart. But instead, I felt something else. Something cold, clean, and strangely peaceful. The next morning, I returned to the lawyer's office and finalized the documents. Everything was legal, binding, and irreversible. They thought I'd given them stability. In truth, I'd handed them the weight of their own choices. Weeks later, when the property tax bills came and the local inspectors demanded repairs, their smiles would fade. And when the government seized their accounts for unpaid dues, they'd realize too late that their safe haven was the very thing pulling them under. Not out of cruelty, out of justice. That night, back at my house, I poured one last glass of whiskey. The wind outside whispered through the pines, carrying faint echoes from Willow Lake. Margaret's photo sat on the mantel. I looked at her gentle smile and whispered, You were right, love. The world stands still here, long enough for truth to catch up. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled across the horizon, soft, distant, final. And I knew this was only the beginning of their lesson. The first sign of trouble arrived 3 weeks later. I was sitting on my porch, fixing an old watch that hadn't ticked in years, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. Dad, Lily's voice was shaky, distant. It's me. I set the watch down carefully. Lily, how's the cabin? There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breath hitch. It's fine, she said. But something happened. A man came by this morning, from the county office. He said we owe property taxes. A lot. I kept my tone even. That's right. It's in the contract you both signed. The land's technically under your responsibility now. She hesitated. But Dad, it's thousands of dollars. We don't have that kind of money. I thought you. You thought I'd keep paying. I finished for her. Even after being erased from your wedding. Even after years of silence. Her voice broke. Please, it's not like that. We just need time. Time was what you took from me, I said quietly. Every year you stopped calling, every celebration I spent alone. You had plenty of time, Lily. You just gave it to someone else. She didn't speak. I could hear her crying softly through the line. For a moment, I almost gave in. The father in me wanted to tell her it was all right, that I'd fix it like I always had. But then I remembered the photos, the wedding smiles, the empty chair that had once been mine. No, this time, she would face the consequences of her choices. I'll see what I can do, I said finally, my voice calm. But you'll need to come to town. We'll talk in person. When she arrived later that week, she looked like a shadow of herself. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled. There were dark circles under her eyes. Ethan didn't come. He's been busy, she murmured when I asked. Trying to find work, I think. I could read between the lines. Ethan was unraveling. Men like him weren't built for losing control. We sat at the same kitchen table where she used to do her homework as a child. The air between us was thick with memories, the kind that hurt to breathe. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way, she said finally, her voice trembling. I thought marrying Ethan would make life easier. I thought his family could give me what I couldn't ask you for. And what was that? I asked quietly. Security, she whispered. Stability. I didn't want to burden you. I let out a slow sigh. Lily, you were never a burden. You were the reason I kept going. But you didn't want a father, you wanted a provider. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I made a mistake. No, I said softly. You made a choice. There's a difference. We talked for a long time, longer than we had in years. By the end, she looked exhausted, but calmer. I told her I'd see what I could do about the taxes, though we both knew what that really meant. She'd have to take responsibility herself. When she left, I watched her car disappear down the old dirt road. For the first time, I felt something strange, not satisfaction, not revenge. Something heavier, a quiet ache. That evening, I drove to the cabin to see things for myself. The moment I arrived, I knew something was wrong. The porch light was off, and the door was slightly open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of damp wood. Ethan sat at the table, surrounded by unopened mail, tax notices, bank letters, collection warnings. His laptop screen glowed faintly, displaying an unfinished email. He looked up when he saw me, his face pale and drawn. "Mr. Rowan," he said hoarsely, "I didn't expect you." "Clearly," I replied, stepping inside. "You've been busy." He laughed bitterly. "Busy losing everything, yes. My father's company is gone. Every account frozen. The press won't stop calling. And now your lease, your little gift, has buried us under debt." I met his gaze. The lease was an opportunity. You chose not to read the fine print. His jaw tightened. "You did this on purpose. I gave you exactly what you wanted," I said evenly. "A place to live, a chance to start over. But you thought comfort was free." He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You think this makes you better than me? You're just a bitter old man taking revenge because no one wants you anymore." The words cut, but only for a second. Then, quietly, I said, "You're wrong. I don't want revenge. I want understanding. And you'll find it the hard way." He stared at me, breathing hard, then turned away. "You've destroyed her," he muttered. "You've destroyed your own daughter." "No," I said. "I'm saving her. From men like you." I left him there, standing in the half-light, his pride crumbling faster than the world he'd built. When I returned home that night, I sat by the window and watched the storm roll in again. Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the lake in brief, sharp bursts. Somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear Margaret's voice, calm, gentle, forgiving. She would have told me to stop, to let go. But forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always heal. Sometimes it teaches. And I was still teaching. 3 days passed before I heard from Lily again. The calls had stopped, the messages too. I told myself she needed time, that maybe she and Ethan were finally learning to rely on themselves. But deep down, I knew the quiet meant something else. It was late evening when headlights flashed outside my window. The gravel crunched, and a door slammed shut. I stepped onto the porch, and there she was, drenched from the rain, trembling, eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's gone." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. She stepped closer, clutching her soaked coat around her shoulders. "Ethan left this morning. He took everything. The money I'd saved, the car, even the papers for the cabin. He said he'd fix things. Then he just disappeared." I motioned her inside. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. I poured her tea, the same way I used to when she was little and had nightmares. Except now, the monsters weren't under her bed. They were wearing wedding rings. "I should have known," she whispered. "He's been different for weeks. Angry, restless. I thought it was stress. But then I found out he'd been talking to someone. A lawyer, maybe. I think he wanted to sell the cabin behind our backs." I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "He said it was our only chance to survive," she continued. "But it wasn't survival. It was greed, just like his father." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not pity. Something more complicated. For years, I had waited for her to see the truth, not just about Ethan, but about the choices that led her away from me. And now she was sitting here, broken, stripped of illusion. I didn't rejoice in it. I only saw how much pain it took for her to finally understand. "Where is he now?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. He won't answer. But he'll come back, I know it. He won't just let go of the cabin." I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing. "Then let him come back. Let him find out what he's really chasing." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" I took a long breath, then opened the drawer beside me. From it, I pulled out a small, worn folder, the one I'd kept hidden all these years. The original investment contract with Richard Hale. Ethan's father's signature, my loss, my quiet humiliation sealed in ink. I laid it on the table in front of her. "This," I said, "is the reason everything began." She hesitated before opening it. Her eyes moved over the pages, confusion giving way to realization. "Dad, he stole from you?" 20 years ago, I said. "Before you ever met Ethan." before you ever thought you were marrying into a better life. His father took what was ours, what could have built your future, and I let it go. I thought forgiveness was the answer, but it wasn't. It was just another way of being forgotten. Lily's lips trembled. You never told me. What would it have changed? I asked. Would you have listened? You were too busy chasing their world to notice mine. She covered her mouth, sobbing softly. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the faint crackle of the fireplace. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. What are you going to do now? I looked out the window. The rain had turned to mist, the kind that blurs everything. The trees, the road, even the line between right and wrong. Nothing, I said. Not yet. Sometimes, the best thing to do is wait. People like Ethan always come back when they think there's still something left to take. She looked at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. And if he does? Then, I said, standing, we'll be ready. That night, I let her sleep in her old room, the one that still smelled faintly of lilac and old books. I sat by the window in the living room, the same spot I'd kept watch so many nights when she was young. Only this time, I wasn't waiting for her to come home. I was waiting for the storm to break again. The next morning, she helped me make breakfast. There was something different in her movements, slower, more thoughtful. Every gesture seemed like an apology without words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I looked at her for a long moment, then said, Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Lily. It's something you understand. She nodded slowly, tears welling up again. The day passed quietly. We didn't talk much. She stayed close, almost afraid to leave the room. And just as the sun began to set, a sound shattered the silence. Tires on gravel. We looked at each other. Outside, a black car pulled up. The door opened. Ethan stepped out, his clothes disheveled, eyes wild. He looked up at the house, at me standing in the doorway, and for the first time, I saw fear in his expression. Mr. Rowan, he called out, rain dripping from his hair. We need to talk. I didn't move. Then talk. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake. But it's not too late to fix this. We can sell the cabin, split the profit. It's fair. Fair. I repeated slowly, my voice cold. You've spent your life taking, Ethan. Do you even remember what fairness looks like? His jaw tightened. If you don't agree, you'll regret it. I smiled faintly. You already do. Lightning flashed behind him, lighting up the trees like ghosts. The rain fell harder, soaking him to the bone. He looked smaller now, not the man from the wedding photos, not the arrogant heir. Just a frightened boy standing in the ruins of his father's shadow. And as I stood there, with Lily behind me, I realized something. My revenge wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about balance. The world was finally correcting itself. Go home, Ethan, I said quietly, before the storm gets worse. But deep down, I knew the storm had only just begun. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell harder, slashing sideways across the cabin, turning the lake into a sheet of trembling silver. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the echoes of old memories and newer regrets. I stood by the door, watching Ethan's shadow blur in the downpour. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped forward, soaked and trembling, his shoes sinking into the mud. You can't just lock me out, he shouted over the storm. This place belongs to Lily too. Behind me, I heard my daughter's quiet voice. Ethan, please go. Her words hit him harder than the rain. He blinked, disbelief mixing with fury. You're on his side now? After everything? He's been manipulating you. Can't you see that? I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. You've done enough talking, Ethan. But he wasn't listening. He pushed past me, bursting into the cabin, dripping water across the old floorboards. His eyes darted to the framed photos on the mantel, the ones of Lily as a little girl, of Margaret smiling beside the lake. He sneered. This is what you think family looks like, he spat. Some broken old man teaching lessons about pride and forgiveness? You're pathetic. Lily flinched. Ethan, stop. He turned to her, voice cracking. We could have had everything. I was trying to fix it, Lily. To get us back what his stupid pride kept from us. You think this place means anything? It's worthless without money. I took a slow step forward. That's your problem. You think worth is measured in dollars. It's measured in what you die to protect, and you've never protected anything but yourself. He glared at me, jaw clenched. Don't lecture me, old man. You think you're better because you built a few walls and called it a home? You're just bitter because your daughter finally saw through you. I didn't flinch. No, I said quietly. She finally saw through you. For a second, everything stopped. The wind, the sound of rain against the roof. Just the three of us standing there, the air heavy with words that couldn't be taken back. Then Ethan's voice dropped low, cold and trembling. You'll regret this. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folder, damp from the rain, but still sealed. You think you're clever, don't you? At least you made us sign. I had it checked. You might have trapped us legally, but if I sell this land before the debt's processed, the profit goes through me. My lawyer confirmed it. I stared at him, calm as stone. You think I didn't know you'd try that? He frowned, confused. Go ahead, I said. Sell it. See what happens. He scoffed. You're bluffing. I walked to the desk in the corner and pulled out a single envelope. Inside were new papers, stamped, signed, sealed. I dropped them on the table. I sold the mineral rights last week. The land's worthless now. No buyer will touch it. You'd get less than you owe in taxes. Ethan's face twisted. He looked at Lily as if searching for support, but she was crying, quietly, hopelessly. You ruined us, he hissed. No, I said. You did that the day you thought deceit could build a life. He slammed his fist against the wall. The sound echoed through the cabin, rattling the windows. You think this is over? I didn't answer. He looked between us one last time, his expression wild, desperate, hollow. Then he turned and stormed out into the rain, the door slamming behind him so hard it shook the frame. Lily sank to her knees, covering her face. Dad, what have I done? I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You trusted the wrong person. But that doesn't mean it's too late to trust the right one. She sobbed quietly for a while, the storm's fury matching her own. I stayed beside her, silent, waiting for her breathing to steady. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. He'll come back, she whispered. I know him. He doesn't give up. I know, I said softly. That's what I'm counting on. The next few hours crawled by. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the lake. I sat by the window, a small lamp casting golden light across the room. Every now and then, I saw a movement in the woods, or thought I did. Shadows flickered between trees. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was just the wind. Around midnight, the door creaked again. Lily stirred awake on the couch. Dad, she murmured. Stay here, I said, standing. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Ethan, drenched, shivering, eyes bloodshot. His car was gone. He must have walked back. Please, he said, voice hoarse. I've got nowhere else to go. I looked at him for a long moment. Behind me, I heard Lily whisper, Dad, no. But I stepped aside. Come in. He hesitated, suspicious. Then he walked in, dripping water across the floor again. I gestured toward the fire. Warm yourself. You look half dead. He crouched near the flames, rubbing his hands together. Why are you helping me? He asked finally. Because, I said quietly, I'm not like you. He turned, confused, just in time to see the sheriff's car lights flash through the window. He shot to his feet. What did you do? Nothing, I said calmly. But I assume the county finally did its job. You've been wanted for questioning about your father's accounts, haven't you? He froze. The knock came seconds later. Ethan Hale, the deputy called. We have a warrant. Lily covered her mouth, tears falling silently. Ethan looked at me, realization dawning in his eyes. You knew. I met his gaze, steady and cold. I always knew. When they let him out, he didn't fight. He just looked back one last time, not with anger, but with a hollow kind of understanding. When the door closed, the rain began to ease. The storm had spent itself at last. Lily stood beside me, trembling. Dad, what happens now? I put a hand on her shoulder, the warmth of the fire flickering across our faces. Now, I said quietly, we start over. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the lake, soft and gold. For the first time in years, the air felt clean. Still, free. But deep inside, I knew peace was never the end of a story. It was just what you earned after surviving the storm. Morning came slow and quiet, like the world had finally taken a deep breath after holding it all night. The storm had left its mark, broken branches, puddles shimmering on the dirt road, and the faint smell of wet pine hanging in the air. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee in my hands. watching mist drift lazily across the lake. The sheriff's car tracks still cut through the mud, two long scars leading away from the cabin. Somewhere out there, Ethan Hale was sitting in a cell, probably cursing my name. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel triumph. I just felt empty. The kind of emptiness that comes after you've won a war you never wanted to fight. Behind me, the door creaked open. Lily stepped out, wrapped in one of Margaret's old knitted sweaters. Her face was pale but calm. The crying had stopped sometime before dawn. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She shook her head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. You loved him, I said. That doesn't go away just because the truth shows up. She leaned against the railing beside me. It wasn't love, she said after a moment. Not really. It was fear. Of being alone. Of ending up like you. I turned my head toward her, eyebrows raised. She flinched, realizing how harsh it sounded. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said softly. And you were right to think it. I was alone. But not because life forced me to be. Because I thought if I gave everything to someone else, I wouldn't have to face what was left of me. She stared at the lake. And did it work? For a while, I said. Then you grew up. And I realized I'd been holding on to a memory, not a person. We stood there in silence, the only sound the faint lap of water against the dock. It was the same silence that had once felt unbearable, the silence of a house too quiet, too empty. But now it felt different. Softer. Honest. After a while, Lily spoke again. What happens to him now? Ethan? The county will investigate his father's records. Ethan was helping move money under different names. They'll have enough to keep him busy for a long time. She closed her eyes. I thought I could fix him, Dad. I sighed. You can't fix people who don't think they're broken. You can only let them fall and hope they learn something on the way down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lily turned to me, eyes glistening. I don't know how to make this right. I can't undo what I did to you. I looked at her, really looked, not as the girl who'd left me behind, but as the woman who had finally found her way home. You don't have to undo it, I said quietly. You just have to live differently now. She nodded slowly, her lip trembling. I want to. If you'll let me stay. I smiled faintly. You don't need my permission. You never did. You just needed to ask. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. For a second, I froze, the shock of it catching me off guard. Then I held her back, my hand resting on her hair, feeling her shoulders shake as she cried into my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something close to it. Over the next few days, we cleaned the cabin together. Repaired what the storm had broken. Repainted the porch. Cooked meals side by side, laughing awkwardly at first, then more freely. Each small act of work was a kind of healing, a way to fill the silence with something living again. One afternoon, while fixing the dock, Lily turned to me. Do you ever think Mom would have wanted this? For us to find our way back here? I smiled faintly. Your mother believed in second chances, even when I didn't. We finished working as the sun set, painting the lake in gold and orange. I could almost see Margaret's reflection in the water, her smile faint and knowing. That evening, Lily made dinner, stew and cornbread, just like her mother used to. We sat at the table, candles flickering between us. She looked across at me, her eyes soft. I think I understand now, she said quietly. Why you didn't yell when I came back. Why you didn't try to hurt him yourself. Because anger's easy, I said. It burns bright, but it doesn't last. Silence, though, silence makes people face themselves. That's the real punishment. She smiled faintly. So what now? What do we do with all this quiet? I looked around the cabin, at the walls that had seen decades of laughter and loss. We rebuild, I said. Not because we have to, because we can. After dinner, she went to bed early. I stayed up by the fire, the room dim and warm. The papers, the old contracts, the lease, the proof of what had been done, lay on the table in front of me. I fed them one by one into the flames. The edges curled, turned black, then vanished into soft gray ash. When the last page was gone, I whispered, It's done. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The sky was clear, and through the open window, I could hear the faint sounds of frogs near the water, the sound of life returning. I leaned back in my chair, eyes closed, and let the warmth of the fire settle over me. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Maybe it wasn't revenge that brought me here. Maybe it was the long way back to forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. And in that quiet, I realized Margaret had been right all along. Willow Lake wasn't where the world stood still. It was where it began again. A month passed before I realized how much the world had changed, or maybe how much I had. The cabin that once echoed with arguments and regret now carried the sounds of life again. Laughter during breakfast, the scrape of chairs, the hum of the old radio that hadn't played in years. Every morning, Lily and I would walk down to the lake with our coffee. She liked to stand by the water's edge, watching the fog rise and disappear into sunlight. "It feels like the world's waking up," she once said. I didn't tell her that I felt the same. The sheriff called one morning to tell me Ethan had confessed to several charges involving his father's accounts. He'd taken the blame to protect what was left of his family name. He wouldn't be getting out anytime soon. I thanked the sheriff, hung up, and said nothing to Lily for a few days. She deserved some peace before the final wound reopened. When I did tell her, she didn't cry. She just nodded, eyes distant. "I hope he finds something worth living for in there," she said quietly. That's when I knew she'd changed. The anger was gone. So was the guilt. What remained was a quiet kind of strength, the kind that comes only after you've lost everything you thought you needed. We spent the next few weeks repairing the dock, painting the cabin's faded shutters, and cleaning out the attic. In one of the old chests, we found Margaret's letters, yellowed with time, tied with a pale blue ribbon. Lily and I sat together on the porch reading them aloud as the sun went down. In one of them, Margaret had written, "If you ever feel lost, Edward, go back to the place where silence listens. You'll find me there." I think she was right. I'd found her again, not in a voice or a dream, but in the peace that had finally returned to our lives. One evening, Lily cooked dinner, roast chicken, potatoes, and herbs she'd picked from the small garden behind the cabin. We ate by candlelight, the kind of quiet meal families take for granted. But for us, every bite felt sacred. "Do you think Mom would forgive me?" she asked suddenly. I looked at her across the table. "She already has," I said. "And so have I." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't deserve that." "No one really does," I said softly. "That's what makes it forgiveness." After dinner, we walked outside. The stars were clear and bright, the lake reflecting every one of them like scattered diamonds. The night air was cool, smelling faintly of rain and pine. "I used to think you were made of stone," Lily said, breaking the silence. "That nothing could touch you. But you're not. You just learned how to survive." I smiled faintly. "You had to see the world for yourself to understand it. That's how it goes. Every child breaks their parents' heart once. It's the only way they learn to love honestly." She looked at me, her eyes glimmering in the moonlight. "I'm sorry, Dad. For the wedding. For the years I didn't call. For thinking money could build a family." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "Apology accepted," I said. "But from now on, don't apologize for who you were. Just be someone better." We stood there in silence, watching the moon ripple across the water. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The world was quiet, whole again. A few days later, Lily told me she wanted to stay, not out of guilt, but to help restore the property. "This place feels like home again," she said. "I want to keep it that way." So we did. Together. Weeks turned into months. The leaves changed, the air grew colder. I started teaching again part-time at the local school, history lessons in the evenings. Sometimes I'd mention the importance of remembering where you come from, how forgetting the past can cost you more than you think. The students always thought I was talking about wars and empires. Maybe I was. Lily began painting again, something she hadn't done since college. She'd sit on the porch, brush in hand, capturing the light on the lake, the curve of the mountains. One afternoon, she showed me a new canvas, a man standing on a dock at sunrise, a young woman beside him. Their reflections touched in the water, forming one shape. "It's us," she said. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I took one of Margaret's letters and placed it beside the painting. Then I sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. For the first time in a long while, I felt no bitterness, no weight on my chest. Only gratitude, for what had broken, for what had healed, and for what had survived in between. I realized something then. Revenge might satisfy the mind, but only forgiveness feeds the soul. When I finally went to bed, the cabin was dark and still. Lily's soft humming drifted from the next room, the same tune Margaret used to sing on quiet nights. It felt like the house was alive again, breathing with us. Before sleep took me, I whispered into the dark, We're okay now, love. She found her way home. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines, carrying the sound across the lake like a promise. And for the first time in many years, I dreamed not of the past, but of tomorrow.